Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Craig Burrell, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Navy is Captain Nick Tate. We warmly welcome the family of Private Arthur Albert Bramley, whose story will be told shortly. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by family, visitors to the memorial, and students on behalf of Leeming Senior High School, Leeming, Western Australia. We also welcome a youth delegation representing the Campbelltown Koshigaya Sisters Cities Association. If able, please stand and join in singing the national anthem. Students, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the hearts of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 Australian men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Private Arthur Albert Bramley. Arthur Bramley was born in 1893 in Bunnan, near Scone, in New South Wales, the youngest of three sons born to John and Harriet Bramley. When he was 2 years old, Arthur's mother, Harriet, passed away. His father later remarried, and Arthur lived with his father, stepmother, 2 brothers, and eventually 5 half-brothers and sisters. He attended the local school at Bunnan and later worked as a labourer. The family briefly lived in Marysborough in Queensland, but by the time of Arthur's enlistment had returned to New South Wales, where they lived at Quirindi, about 50 kilometres north of Scone. Arthur enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force in March 1916 and soon joined the 41st Battalion. Raised in Brisbane, the battalion was largely recruited from Queensland and northern New South Wales. Arthur spent 2 months training in Australia before embarking for England, where he continued to train and acclimatise to the European conditions. Arthur and the 41st Battalion arrived in France on the 25th of November 1916 and entered the front line for the first time on Christmas Eve. The terrible conditions of the winter of 1916 and 17 took their toll on the men, and Arthur was briefly hospitalised in January with the mumps. When he returned to fighting duties, he spent a short period of time working with the 2nd Australian Tunnelling Company, digging trenches and bunkers to protect troops on the front line. He returned to the 41st Battalion in February 1917 and spent the next 8 months enduring hardships and drudgery of trench warfare. The 41st spent their time either manning frontline trenches, enduring intermittent enemy artillery and machine gun fire, or resting and training behind the front. On the 7th of June, the battalion played a supporting role in the Battle of Messines in Belgium, an operation that cost nearly 6,800 Australian casualties. Arthur's brother John, who was serving in the 47th Battalion, would also have taken part in this battle, but he was recovering in hospital from illness at that time. Later that month, Arthur and the 41st Battalion fought to establish a new front line in an exposed position west of Warrington. In atrocious conditions, the troops worked night and day under constant, heavy, high-explosive artillery fire. This notorious action became known to the men of the battalion as the 18 Days. In early October, they participated in fighting at Brunside, part of the 3rd Battle of Ypres. On raining conditions, the 41st Battalion marched through the night of the 3rd and 4th of October to reach their starting position, and while doing so, came under intermittent German artillery fire. They arrived at their starting point at 5 a.m. and waited in the steady rain and enemy artillery fire for over an hour before advancing behind a covering British artillery bombardment. Australian forces eventually gained all of their objectives, but at the cost of 6,500 casualties. Arthur and the 41st Battalion spent the next 5 months rotating between frontline duties and rest in the Flanders region of Belgium. In March 1918, they were rushed south into the Somme region to defend Amiens from a new German offensive. They successfully defended against the German attack, and then in August took part in the Allied counter-offensive on German lines. In the days following the beginning of the Allied offensive, the 41st Battalion was consolidating gains and capturing new lines near Mericourt. The day before men of the battalion were due for rotation away from the front for rest, they came under heavy German high-explosive artillery fire again and sustained heavy casualties. Arthur was killed instantly amidst the chaos of the German bombardment. He was 25 years old. He now lies in the Heath Cemetery, France, where 1,860 Commonwealth servicemen of the First World War are buried or commemorated. A newspaper report announcing the sad news of his death stated that he was favourably known on the western side of our district and his passing away in defence of his empire will be received with feelings of deep regret. Private Arthur Albert Bramley is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, amongst almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. This is but one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Private Arthur Albert Bramley, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Poziere or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, had thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial, and we wish you all a very good evening.